Predictably, warfare means that medical professionals are very busy, trying to take care of large numbers of people and trying to address a different array of problems than they had in peacetime. Despite the incomplete nature of the accomplishments, medicine and care for the wounded saw an impressive degree of innovation during the Civil War. Welcome to Unit 9 of the Technology, Innovation, and the Civil War course. On average, a Civil War soldier was about as likely to die of disease as of combat. Predictably, younger soldiers died more often in combat than of illness, and their older comrades died more of illness than of combat. But if you take it all together, the cumulative averages come out surprisingly even. Crowding large numbers of people with limited sanitation and a decade before the development of germ theory was almost a recipe for disease. Over 250,000 Union soldiers died of disease, and 164,000 Confederates are believed to as well, in an army that was barely a third as large as the Union Army. Civilians responded by establishing the U.S. Sanitary Commission, which began to partner with the federal government. The stern but tireless Dorothea Dix was put in charge of selecting female nurses. This was a new innovation, going back only 5 years earlier to the Crimean War. Despite traditions of caring for sick family members and the frequent service of poorer women as midwives assisting childbirth, many people feared that women could not handle the strains of working in a battlefield hospital with wounded men. Any time that an innovation is being started, its defenders have to be careful not to allow early failure. Dix worried that some women might join nursing with romantic notions in their heads without understanding how hard and how stressful working in a combat hospital might be. Dix therefore rejected literally thousands of applicants, and she insisted that women be essentially middle-aged and plainly dressed to avoid turning the heads of wounded men. Among hospital staff and soldiers of all denominations and on both sides, Catholic nuns were probably the most popular. Some Catholic orders had cared for the sick for centuries. The Hospitallers were they were a male warrior medical order founded during the Crusades. In the Civil War, many women who did nursing tasks were officially considered cooks or laundresses and were helping out with medical work during emergencies, in the aftermath of battles. Therefore, the official figures for nursing personnel is lower than the actual practical number, which cannot be known with complete certainty. In the North, nurses, in order to get that term, a woman was a nurse if she was a female medical worker approved by Dix. There were also male nurses, and as a matter of fact, in official listings, there are more official male nurses than female during the Civil War. Those other women who helped out with medical tasks were commonly referred to as matrons, to differentiate them from Dix's official nurse personnel. As nursing transitioned from a completely male profession into a majority male profession that included large numbers of women, changes also took place in hospital design. Lacking germ theory, but noticing that diseases spread when patients were crowded together in dank rooms, architects began designing purpose-built hospitals in pavilions that radiated outward and maximized airflow in an age still preceding powered fans. Remember, airflow is a tough, tricky challenge before you've got an ability to move air mechanically. Collection and transportation of the wounded was another crucial problem. At first, carrying off the wounded was a chore that was left to the regiment's band and any stragglers that might be rounded up. After first Bull Run, some soldiers lay on the battlefield for 24 hours before being collected, and predictably, many died of their wounds before they could even be moved, let alone treated. For all his shortcomings as a military commander, George McClellan could identify organizational problems and fix them. In 1862, in part prodded by the U.S. Sanitary Commission, McClellan made neurologist William Hammond the Surgeon General of the Medical Corps. That summer, McClellan made Jonathan Letterman the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, the Union's principal land force during the war. Letterman introduced an organized ambulance corps to collect the wounded. He also oversaw the design of specialized vehicles with better, and still crude by our standards, but better shock systems made of India rubber to help cushion the ambulance wagon's movement and remove one additional pain that the wounded suffered as they were transported to the rear. Hammond established a hospital to promote the study of nervous system disorders that were related to warfare. And doctors, for the first time during the Civil War, identified the phenomenon of phantom limb and the reflex paralysis that they called combat reaction. Pain remained a major problem. Quinine, or quinine, a substance useful in combating malaria, was used as often as it was in stock. It was a very popular medical material. Because of the Union's blockade of southern ports, this meant that it was used liberally for Union wounded by Union doctors, but it was, of course, much scarcer in Confederate hospitals. Morphine was used, but morphine was not abundant, and its methods of working were not terribly well understood. Drinking whiskey, although a terrible alternative because of its depressant qualities as an alcohol, was relatively more plentiful than medicines like quinine or like morphine. And as a result, whiskey was the most likely tool as an anesthetic, as a pain reliever. It was probably the one that was most likely to be on the shelf of a doctor's cabinet, his supply cabinet in a wagon. Often, however, there was nothing available at all, and surgeries would be conducted without anesthetic whatsoever. This was bad news for many Civil War patients, since doctors knew that gunshot wounds would be fatal if infection spread. Remember that we've got lead bullets that are kind of bouncing around inside a person. The velocity of these Minet ball bullets is not fast enough to actually necessarily punch through a body. And so what you end up having is this wad of lead that has kind of deformed itself into another shape as it traveled within the body. The most probable solution to a bullet wound in an arm or a leg was amputation. If a soldier was wounded in the torso, obviously a stomach and intestines cannot be amputated. Therefore, what were known as gut shots were typically fatal. You could expect that a soldier who was shot in the gut with a Minet ball was probably going to die, and it was probably going to be a pretty lingering, unpleasant way to go. Also, if you're dealing with a wound in the stomach or the intestinal area, rapid infection was almost inevitable. There was simply nothing that doctors could do during the Civil War era with wounds in the stomach. In a bid to treat vast numbers of casualties, whose wounds ranged in type and in degree, American doctors practiced a method that had been pioneered by French military medical personnel during the Napoleonic Wars. Triage meant the separation of casualties into three groups. First was those who would probably live. Second was those who would probably die regardless of medical attention. And third was the group for whom medical treatment might mean survival rather than death. Triage was introduced and practiced in order to save lives. But it was a relatively new practice, and it had gut-wrenching implications that were especially troubling to medical staff who had just recently joined the profession from the larger civilian world. Remember that most of the medical personnel on the Civil War battlefield and behind it are not coming to war with medical training as their civilian calling, practice. They're coming more or less green, a lot like a lot of the soldiers were, coming from various modes of civilian life to go fight for the country in this particular emergency. A lot of the medical personnel also are serving without any particular background in medicine, and witnessing triage and having to perform triage was a pretty stressful experience. In view of medical developments during the Civil War, I'd like you to consider this question on the discussion board. Why are new potential innovations adopted and embraced or rejected? Think about the design of hospitals, the design of new medical equipment to transport or care for the wounded, and also the selection of who exactly is going to be caring for the wounded. Next time, we'll be looking at policy innovations in the war.